Speaker, I know that many of our colleagues in the tornado corridor are not here today. I want to offer my deepest concern and prayers as the recovery begins, and praying for those who've lost their lives, some, of course, in Grand Prairie, in Texas, in the northern area, in Texas, and, of course, in the area now in Oklahoma. This is a devastating time with these enormous tornadoes, as evidenced by a quote by Bill Bunting with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Storm Prediction Center told CNN, "Our worst fears are becoming realized this afternoon." I hope that we will be able to find all of those who have been harmed safely and all of those who are missing. But, Mr. Speaker, the most important part is that the nation needs to stand up and be of help. This is a time, frankly, for bipartisanship to take the highest level and partisanship to end. It's time to end this sequester. There's too much need in this country, and I hope that we will be able to serve all of those who are now suffering across America, because that is what this Congress needs to do. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise in support of the Keystone Pipeline. Keystone Pipeline represents 40,000 American jobs. It's been under study for 1,700 days, 5 years. It is a project that could drive down the cost of energy, cut our imports from our enemies in half. It could invigorate our economy, and yet we continue to study and study. We could study this program for decades, and we'll never resolve all the issues. It's time to move forward. You know, we're the greatest country on earth. We've got nobody can beat us if we stand toe-to-toe. But we've got a noose of regulation around our own necks, and we're strangling ourselves. It's time to fish or cut bait. Let's make a decision. Let's move forward with this very valuable project. Thank you. I yield back.
The chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Clyburn of South Carolina for today, and Ms. Herrera Butler of Texas for today and the balance of the week.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Ribble, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the subject of my special order.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud and honored to lead this discussion on the House floor this evening. I organized this special order to show the American people that there are members of Congress who can have a civilized conversation and who actually want to solve problems. Everyone here tonight is a member of the organization No Labels. As you can see, we're all wearing orange pins as a symbol of our solidarity. These problem solver pins represent a lot about who we are and who we want to be as legislators. Instead of wasting time fighting, we're committed to fixing what's broken here in Washington. Being identified as either a Republican or Democrat says a lot about each of our values and our ideologies, but it's not the sum total of who we are. I'm proud to be a Republican and have a conservative voting record, and that supports my beliefs. But just because there's an R or D after someone's name should not automatically make them enemies. It's possible to find ways to work together, and all of us are here tonight as proof of that. I recently introduced a biennial budgeting bill that has both Democrat and Republican co-sponsors. This is just one of many examples that show that both sides of the aisle can get behind legislation that will help better our economy. Unfortunately, Congress has come to a point where problems are not getting solved because too many are yelling. and not enough are listening. I was taught that the best way to attack a problem is putting all possible solutions on the table and having a conversation about the pros and cons of each. Nowadays in Washington, the meaning of solution has become a euphemism for undercutting the other party. Sound bites have replaced conversations, which has made attacking others easier and more widespread. It seems like every time you turn on the television or open a newspaper, there's some headline about Republicans and Democrats spewing vitriol at each other or playing another round of the never-ending blame game. This type of behavior and unwillingness to work on solving problems must end in order for our country to move forward. And that's why we're all here tonight, to show that Washington doesn't have to function this way. All of us came to Congress because we wanted to do our part to make our country better and to help our constituents back home. And coming together on the House floor is a small way to reaffirm our dedication to the American people and let them know that we'll work for their best interest. This evening you'll hear from both Democrats and Republicans who are committed to problem solving. I'm proud to say that these people are not just my colleagues, but they're my friends. And while we don't see eye to eye on everything, we have all made it a point to put a stop to the spiteful tone that has become the norm here in Washington, and to actually have a real conversation with one another. And tonight, the American people watching get to be a part of this. And with that, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Young.
I thank my good friend from Wisconsin. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to stand here tonight as a member of this Problem Solvers Coalition. The coalition offers a common ground for lawmakers to make government work better and to negotiate solutions without the blinders of partisan talking points. Our country has a history during difficult times, times more difficult than these, times of great political strife, of coming together, rank-and-file Americans and legislators alike. During the early days of our republic, Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to his friend Edward Rutledge, and he said this, quote, "You and I have seen warm debate and high political passions, but gentlemen of different politics would then speak to each other. It is not so now. Men who have been intimate all their lives cross the street to avoid meeting and turn their heads the other way lest they should be obliged to tip their hat." Well, we as Americans made it through those difficult times, and eventually this hall was populated by people who were prepared to tip their hat. During this time in our history, we too need to be hat tippers. We need more hat tippers in the U.S. Congress. We need more statesmen, more men and women who are prepared to root out waste, to improve the performance of our largest programs of government, to modulate our discourse. We need to recognize that our public disagreements aren't always about ends. Sometimes they're merely about means. So I invite my colleagues to join this coalition of problem solvers. Let's work together, Republican and Democrat. Let's work together for the common good, for the future of this country. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I appreciate his comments. Thank you for being here tonight. And now I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I ran for Congress on a pledge of bipartisanship. I ran on behalf of citizens who were disappointed in their leaders in Washington, who focus on partisan bickering rather than problem solving. In my first days in Congress, I was also disappointed in Washington. I was disappointed that everything in D.C. was separated by party affiliation. This is why one of my first actions as a freshman was to join the No Labels Problem Solvers Group, which I am now proudly a co-chair. Mr. Speaker, No Labels has offered a way for members of both parties to get to know each other. Simply put, it's easier to solve problems when you know the person you're working with. However, No Labels does more than break down barriers. It helps build trust between members that is necessary to solve problems. Many of the fiscal problems we face today developed over many decades. Fixing these problems will take steady, committed work. No, we won't agree on everything, but I am optimistic. I am optimistic because more and more leaders are focusing on problem solving rather than partisanship. I've already seen more bipartisanship and substantive action in this Congress than many in recent memory. In fact, I've seen an overwhelming amount of bills introduced by No Labels members, with both Republicans and Democrats as lead sponsors. We must urge and support our leaders to go big to solve the fiscal issues we face. We must push for a grand bargain. We need long-term solutions, not short-term political gimmicks. Unfortunately, a number of scandals have contributed to one of the biggest problems our country faces, a lack of trust in government. The public sees their leaders focusing on beltway intrigue rather than pragmatic solutions. Mr. Speaker, that is why I invite more of my colleagues to join me in this group to work together, to solve problems, and to restore the trust of the American people. There is no ideological litmus test to join this group. What is required is a willingness to respect one another and resolve to work together to solve problems. No Labels is doing just that. Fix, not fight. I yield the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank you for your comments. And I'd now like to yield 2 minutes of time to a very good friend of mine, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Kurt Schrader.
Thank you very much. I thank the gentleman from Wisconsin. We've collaborated on a number of endeavors, most recently in the Ag Committee. Great bipartisan debate in the Agriculture Committee. I commend for those late-night insomniacs that for their 11-hour viewing enjoyment, come watch how a real committee should work in the Congress of the United States, where there's give and take, people hold strong positions, but at the end of the day, the process moves forward. I'd like to echo my friends and colleagues' comments here. The Problem Solvers Caucus, of which we're all members, is an outgrowth of the No Labels movement that's been going on for several years. Late last year, No Labels approached a number of us in Congress about getting together, and were we truly interested in solving problems? And I think the thing that got all of our attention, it wasn't giving up who you were, it wasn't giving up your philosophy. We have extreme right members, we have extreme left members, and we've got some of our centrists, or as my colleagues like to call it, squishy people in the middle. And that's not a bad thing necessarily. But what we are all about is solving problems, not dealing with the minutiae, the differences that we have, dealing with all these one-off issues that our members, our constituents don't send us to Congress to deal with. But we are trying to deal with bigger issues. The GAO, General Accounting Office, sends us information every year about things that should be fixed in Congress, nonpartisan, bipartisan issues that we should be addressing. The No Labels group is starting to pick those things up. As the gentleman from Florida talked about, there's a plethora of issues upon which we can agree. And the mark of a true statesman, I think, is not focusing on what you disagree on with your colleagues, but what you can agree on. I think that and some of the bigger issues that hopefully will get forward on, the No Labels group will be attacking. You'll see us also start to look at some of the reforms of the process. I alluded to the Ag Committee the other day. There are ways to make this process work here, make America proud, and as we've heard so far, restore faith in your government once again, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. You know, it was interesting when I first came here how few places where both parties could get together and talk about issues. It just really didn't exist. And those of us that have decided to get together and talk, we've never asked anyone to lay down their own personal beliefs or ideologies, but we did ask for them to stand up and defend them and to speak about them and to encourage others and to, most importantly, listen to each other and to try to learn why we believe what we believe. And so thank you very much. And I'd like to now introduce and yield 2 minutes of time to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Mr. Speaker, I want to join my colleagues today to affirm our collective effort to put aside partisanship wherever possible and seek the solutions our country needs. As I meet with constituents across Colorado's 6th Congressional District, I constantly hear the refrain, what is Congress doing to help our country? The people of Aurora, Colorado, and the surrounding communities in my district want to know what is being done to fix the economy, to generate jobs, to care for our veterans, and to defend our nation. They don't ask about the current Beltway infighting. They want to know what is being done about our debt, to help with their children's schools. I'm glad to stand here today and repeat the message that members of Congress need to put aside partisan agendas and seek solutions together. Speaker, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I'd now like to yield 2 minutes of time to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Maloney.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join my colleagues in commending the terrific work of the No Labels group. I, like others, came to Congress not to fight but to fix problems. And I've always thought that there's so much work to do. If we just start working on the things we agree about, we'll all be tired at the end of the day. We won't have time to fight. And it's in that spirit that we've approached our work, many of us that are new to the Congress, and I think we're seeing results. The last Congress was content to have an argument about a farm bill, and as my colleague noted, we're working in a bipartisan way to bring one to the floor and to get results for the American people. The last Congress was content to give us the sequester, but a bunch of us working across the aisle in this Congress are more interested in recommending the nonpartisan, in implementing the nonpartisan recommendations of the GAO to help us cut government waste that we can all agree shouldn't be there. We've agreed on things like no budget, no pay. We've agreed on things in a bipartisan way like the Violence Against Women Act. These are delivering real results for real families. I represent the Hudson Valley of New York, and I'm proud to say that we've got one of the largest chapters of the No Labels group in Westchester. I didn't come here to be part of the red team or the blue team. I didn't come here to fight. I came here to find solutions and to get results for my constituents and the people who pay the bills, the taxpayers. And I'm encouraged and delighted that there are so many friends across the aisle in the Republican Party who want to do the same thing. And I think if we can get more of our colleagues to join us, we can create a real movement in this Congress, and we can start a new day. It may be too soon to say that we've turned the corner, but I believe we've made an important start. And I'm committed to continuing to work across the aisle to get results. And I yield back.
And that's encouraging to all of us. I appreciate your comments, and now I'll yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bentivolio.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to echo what my friend Congressman Reed Ribble said a moment ago. The people of southeastern Michigan sent me here to solve the problems affecting our great nation. The Problem Solvers Coalition offers a chance to break the partisan gridlock by bringing Democrats and Republicans together to focus on good governance. Our coalition meets regularly to find common sense solutions because Washington's inability to work together has put the future of our children and grandchildren in jeopardy. More than 2 centuries ago, members of the first Congress were summoned to uphold and defend the Constitution. The proudest boast then in the civilized world was, "I am an American." Today, we must ensure that being an American makes you the envy of the world. I recognize that we all have different viewpoints. I understand that this is a contentious time in Congress. Different viewpoints clash, sometimes rightfully so. However, I do think that there is one goal that everyone here has, to hand the next generation a country that is in better condition than when we found it. We must strive valiantly and we must dare greatly to solve problems here in Washington by working together to find common ground. We all have been sent here to serve the people, and I ask my colleagues to join the Problem Solvers Coalition and to start doing the work of the people. Thank you, and God bless you. I yield the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Thank you for your comments. And now I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson.
Well, I thank my colleague for yielding, and it's a pleasure to join my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to discuss no labels. You know, I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet tonight is the fact that it's about no labels. We're going to get away from Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. This is about bringing people together to try to reach consensus and solve problems. Because when you really think about it, our political dialogue in this country has been reduced too often to this notion where there are only 2 points of view. Only 2 ways to look at an issue, and all Democrats think one way, all Republicans think the other, and there's no other way to look at an issue. Well, as we all know, life generally is not that simple. And it's important for us to constructively come together in a way where we act as representatives, because our system of government is not a parliamentary system. where just 2 points of view are to be discussed. Our system of government is a representative system of government. We have 435 people in the House of Representatives who all can bring a point of view to the table to try to solve problems and make progress. That's why I'm pleased to be associated and participating with the No Labels group. I'm pleased that across the country people are signing up to join as citizen activists for No Labels as well. It tells you where the country wants us to go as an institution. No more bickering, no more playing the blame game. Let's sit down and let's try to work together to get things done. I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Thank my friend for yielding. You know, the one thing that I hear more than anything else when I travel back home to Pennsylvania is the frustration with Washington and the massive divide that they see that prevents us from solving real problems, from solving American problems. And as I've heard from my colleagues here tonight, that feeling is not limited to my communities of Bucks County and Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. It doesn't take much to see that our nation is facing some pretty serious problems. And it's long been clear to me that we need lawmakers to come together and put aside politics and do what we were elected to do, which is to solve problems. When I served as a local official back home in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, on a bipartisan board, it didn't take long to figure out that there was no Republican way or Democrat way to fix a bridge or to care for an abused or abandoned or neglected child. It was just the right way to do it. So now, as a member of the No Labels problem solvers, I'm proud to be part of the solution and to enthusiastically subscribe to our motto, which is stop fighting and start fixing. Once we cross the so-called political divide and talk to each other, we readily find common ground, balance, and ultimately solutions. I was proud to be an early proponent of the No Labels initiative, No Budget, No Pay, which passed the House recently and yielded real results, the first budget resolution from the Senate in 4 years. Recently, I wrote an editorial piece with my colleague, Representative Cheri Bustos, that highlighted the importance of bipartisan problem solving to address wasteful government spending and advance common sense legislation that we can all agree upon. We must restore faith in our elected leaders. The public's trust has been shaken, and rightly so. As we've seen lately, partisan politics tarnishes everything from national security to tax enforcement. We can no longer afford partisan politics as usual. So we're here to be problem solvers, going forward to get something done for the good of the people, and there's no time to waste. I yield back.
Indeed, there's no time to waste. I yield 2 minutes to the gentle lady from Illinois, Ms. Bustos.
Thank you to the gentleman from Wisconsin. Far too often, people tend to focus on our differences instead of what brings us together. Despite what we all may hear, common ground does exist among lawmakers from opposing sides. Although the group we call No Labels is made up of Democrats and Republicans, what unites the 68 of us making up this group is the idea that we can and should get done in Washington. The people of each of our regions in the United States sent us to the nation's capital not to position and posture, but to use common sense and compromise to move our country forward. That is why I joined the bipartisan No Labels group and have been identified as a congressional problem solver. No Labels is the only bipartisan, bicameral group in Congress and is made up of liberals, moderates, conservatives, the left, the right, and the middle coming together. While we surely don't agree on every issue, there are plenty of areas where we can find to achieve results for the people who we represent. Let me just share a recent example. I'm a member of the House Ag Committee, and last week we completed an exercise in bipartisanship by working together to pass, by a large margin, a 5-year farm bill. The Republican chairman, Frank Lucas, and the Democratic ranking member, Collin Peterson, and the entire committee was civil, accommodating, and worked well together. It was refreshing. In fact, 9 of my fellow congressional problem solvers of both Democrat and Republican sides are on the Ag Committee with me. Although we didn't agree on every aspect of the bill, and I believe there still is room for improvement, we all come from different regions of the country where people expect their elected officials to put politics aside and do their job, period. Last year, Congress wasn't able to get its act together and pass a 5-year farm bill, so instead had to resort to a short-term extension that expires in a matter of months. I'm hopeful that this year will be different. The family farmers I talk with back home in Illinois want security and stability that comes with a 5-year farm bill, so they can plan for the future and look at their growth and investments and continue to provide food for our nation that the world also depends on. If we approached more issues in a bipartisan basis like we did on the Ag Committee and like we do in No Labels, Congress would be more productive and the American people would be better off. I'm committed to working with my No Labels colleagues to achieve this goal of bipartisanship and urge all members of Congress to join us in this pursuit. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Dent.
Thank you, Mr. Rill, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to, Mr. Speaker, to address the House tonight regarding the Problem Solvers Group. I, too, was a proud member of this group, a group of Republicans and Democrats who I think have really one thing in common more than anything else. It's a group of members of Congress who believe we have an affirmative obligation to govern. That is, we're trying to find a way to get to yes on some of the big issues of the day, because the problems are huge. And clearly, when the country sees a lot of the mindless bickering and fighting that goes on here, it does not inspire confidence, and it certainly does contribute to greater uncertainty. And while nobody here is checking their ideologies or their philosophies at the door, people understand that we must be practical and pragmatic at times to try to find a solution to a common problem. That doesn't mean we'll always get to a solution. Sometimes we will, and sometimes we don't. But you know what? It's important that we try. And I think that's what this group is about, trying to find solutions to the big problems of the day, not running away from, not hiding, not each side running to their safe camp and then ignoring the problem and hoping that somebody else at a later day will deal with it. And what I'm proud about most of this group is that many of these members have demonstrated political courage on both sides of the aisle and have stood up time and again to try to do the right thing for the good of the country. Like everybody else here, too, I hear from my constituents. My constituents are very much alarmed by what they're seeing happening in Washington. They think that we're in warring camps. No one likes each other and no one gets along. But worst of all, that no one's trying. No one's trying to solve the great problems of the day. And I'm really pleased, as has been mentioned previously, that this Problem Solvers Group first issue out of the box for us was no budget, no pay. An idea that originated with this organization, and sure enough, within a fairly short order, it became law. It's a step. It's an important step, and I'm proud that this group was part of it. And I know over time and in the near future, this organization will be coming up with more ideas that we can present to the American people in a way that I think they will find very helpful, very useful. Again, I just wanted to, again, commend my colleagues here on both sides of the aisle, many of whom I call friends. They're all friends who are really trying to do the right thing. And so I just wanted to say thank you, and I commend the efforts, and we need more of this, not less of it. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. It's now a privilege of mine to yield to my friend from Georgia. 3 minutes of time, Mr. Barrow.
I thank the gentleman from Wisconsin for the time, but more importantly, I thank him for the leadership that he's showing in this common endeavor. I want to echo what my good friend Congressman Dent just said, but I want to make an additional point. The folks in Georgia sent me to Washington to help get things done, not get caught up in scoring political points. They're fed up with the hyper-partisanship in Congress, and that's why I've joined this group. The scandals at the IRS and the Justice Department contribute to one of the biggest problems in our country right now. Americans don't trust their government to do the right thing. The goal of this group is to strengthen the faith that folks have in government. The Problem Solvers Coalition offers a chance to break the gridlock by getting Democrats and Republicans focused on actually getting things done in Congress. Unlike some folks, we don't think compromise is a dirty word. Washington's refusal to respect and work with one another means we're failing this generation and the next generation. No Labels offers a common ground for lawmakers to make government work better and negotiate solutions without the blinders of partisan talking points. We have real problems that are crying out for compromise right now, and we all can't just sit here arguing just to get us through the next election. If we continue with that approach, we won't be doing this country and the folks we represent any good down the road. Mr. Speaker, my Bible says a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor more than silver or gold. I believe that both parties have a great deal to contribute to this country's past, have a great deal to be proud of in their past, and they have a lot to contribute to our country's future. But the label, the name, the good name that folks are looking for is problem solver. That is the name that brings us together. That is the name that describes our function. That's why I'm proud to support this group and their work. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And with that, I'd like to yield 3 minutes of time to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
I thank the gentleman from Wisconsin, my friend, for yielding, and want to really echo the comments of my friend from Georgia, Mr. Barrow. I first came to Washington to serve in the House a little more than 2 years ago after spending 8 years as mayor of the city of Providence. And when you're a mayor of a city or town, you are a problem solver. You have lots of issues which come before you, lots of decisions to make, but most importantly, you have to get things done. You don't have a Republican pothole or a Democratic tree that needs to be cut. You just have things that need to be done and action that needs to be taken. The men and women and families of Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District didn't send me to Congress to score political points or engage in political games. They sent me here to get things done, to confront the challenges facing our country and my state. And I'm very proud to be a founding member of the Problem Solvers of No Labels, a coalition that's offering a venue for Republicans and Democrats to come together, to work together, to find solutions to, most importantly, govern our nation. And really importantly, as my friend from Wisconsin said, you know, we have people in No Labels who come from a whole range of different ideologies, who feel very passionately about issues that are important to them and to their constituents and make the case in very, very spirited discussions. But we come to it with a willingness to listen to each other, to consider each other's views, to engage in civil discourse, and most importantly, come to it with a commitment to try to solve problems, to work together to grow our economy, responsibly cut the deficit, protect critical programs like Social Security and Medicare. There's no question that in the last few years, Washington has stopped working the way it should. Republicans and Democrats have grown more concerned with 30-second ads than serving our constituents. Washington has failed to do its job. There are real problems facing our country. We need to start working together again in the spirit of bipartisanship that has defined our nation over the years through global conflict, economic depression, and even fierce internal political debates. We've always come together to get things done and to act in the best interest of our country. I know that's what No Labels is committed to. That's what we're committed to on both sides of the aisle as part of Problem Solvers. And I urge all of my colleagues to join us in this effort. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. And with that, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Michaud, for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much for yielding. And I want to thank the gentleman from Wisconsin for his leadership in the No Label problem-solving group, and really enjoy working with you. I came to Congress after serving in Maine legislature for 22 years, a place where Democrats, Independents, and Republicans did work together to get things done. The House Veterans Affairs Committee also works on a bipartisan basis, and I'm proud to serve on the committee. Chairman Miller and myself, we work very well together along with our committee members to try to find solutions to the problems that our veterans are facing today, and we're doing it in a nonpartisan way, and that's how things should work. However, I do remain concerned about Congress and Washington as a whole. There's too much division, gamesmanship, and too little cooperation. But the group that you see here tonight on this floor that I'm speaking with is a group that actually gives me hope, a group that individuals, Republicans, Democrats from all different facets of life, from different parts of the country, are willing to sit down and work together to get things done. And I'm very proud to join my fellow problem solvers because it's long past time to work together and get things done for American people. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield back to balance my time.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back, and I remember very clearly, Mr. Speaker, I had been in Congress only a few days. The President of the United States came into this chamber for the State of the Union address, and my good friend from Maine invited me to sit with him We began a relationship there and continue to work together throughout these last few years. Thank you very much for coming to the floor tonight. And with that, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Valadao.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I travel around my district, I have witnessed firsthand many of the problems my constituents face on a daily basis: water shortages, difficulty pursuing a higher education, and high unemployment. And while there are many ways to address each of these issues, and we may not always agree on the best course of action, one thing is clear: Americans are sick of the gridlock in Washington. Congress cannot continue to be sidetracked by political games and at the same time expect for real progress to be made. We must put aside our political differences and as leaders come together to do what's best for our constituents, the American people. That's why I joined the Problem Solvers Coalition. The group is made up of both Republicans and Democrats alike who are committed to focusing on policy, not politics. We meet on a regular basis to discuss, debate, and find common ground on the most pressing issues of our day. It is only through a mutual understanding and respect that we will begin to address the serious issues our nation faces and move forward together. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments and for yielding. And with that, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Ribble, and thank you for conducting this hour this evening. You know, as I travel around my district in upstate New York, which forms the convergence of Vermont, Quebec, and New York, I hear a couple of questions from my constituents. The first is about jobs, and the second is, why can't you fellows work together? No labels is a big part of that answer. We must work at the process of discussing issues, of gathering facts, and I want to repeat that, of gathering facts, then discussing those facts, and then reaching compromise. That is what the American people sent us here to do. That is why I came to Congress 3.5 years ago. We all recognize that no one, no party, no group has a monopoly on good ideas, nor on the facts. I urge all of my colleagues in Congress to work with us so that we will develop the kind of relationships, the kind of action, the kind of motivation that allows us to work for our friends and neighbors at home, those whom we call constituents. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I thank the gentleman for his comments. And with that, I'd like to yield 3 minutes of time to the gentleman from California, Mr. Barrow.
Thank you to my colleague from Wisconsin for organizing this, to my colleague from New York, and you know, I'm honored to be here with colleagues from both sides of the aisle. As you've heard us talking about the problem solvers, that's what we're elected to do, to solve problems. You know, one of the first organizations I joined when I got here was the No Labels organization. One of the first bills that I had the honor of co-sponsoring was the No Budget, No Pay legislation. What a novel idea, putting together a budget. You know, that was a bill that was an idea that came out of the problem solvers. We sponsored that bill, we put it forth, and lo and behold, the House of Representatives has a budget, the Senate has a budget, and the President has a budget. Now we've got to continue moving forward, and that is exactly what this organization allows us to do. It brings Democrats and Republicans together to have a conversation, to listen to one another, and to solve problems. We're not going to agree on everything, and in fact, in divided government, it isn't necessary that we agree on everything. You want to have all the ideas, and we're not asking anyone to give up their convictions. What we are asking, though, is for us to listen to one another, to hear the ideas that are being put out there, and then finding the common ground. So we can start working together on that common ground, moving forward and addressing the challenges that our nation faces. We don't have to look too far back in our history to see how this works. The great speaker, Tip O'Neill, was able to work together with President Ronald Reagan to not only address some of our debt and deficit, but to also strengthen Social Security. President Bill Clinton was able to work with Speaker Newt Gingrich to not only balance our budget, but to create budget surpluses. Now, the American people expect us to start working together. I grew up in a country that always talked about what we could do, that focused on the challenge of the day. It is time that we started coming together as Democrats and Republicans, and it's time we started solving problems. That's why I'm so glad to be here and a member of the Problem Solvers and a co-chair of the Problem Solvers. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I'd like to now to yield 3 minutes' time to the gentle lady from Hawaii, Ms. Gabbard.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my colleague from Wisconsin for leading this effort and for your leadership in bringing together members from all parts of the country and representing many diverse viewpoints. I know for me, one thing that I often hear every time I go home is a sense of frustration from constituents, from people within my community who ask, why can't Congress get anything done? What are you doing to take action for the American people, and is there hope? Is there any way to fix this mess that we seem to be in? And I was talking with some of my Republican colleagues, new members, and I found that the answer that we were giving people when they expressed their frustration was the same, and that was that the hope that we see every day as we do our work here lies in the fact that collectively we recognize that we have a mandate from those in our communities to work together, to do the people's work, and to remember every single day that the most important thing we share in common is that we serve at the pleasure of our constituents as representatives, as voices for the people. And to me, that's really what this Problem Solvers Caucus is all about. It's about Democrats and Republicans coming together, finding these practical, real solutions that will allow us to make true progress in the spirit of service. And as my colleagues know, I often talk about this is what we in Hawaii call the spirit of aloha, when you can have a conversation with someone who you may disagree with on some issues, but who you can respect, who you can listen to sincerely and have a true conversation to come up with the best idea and the best solution on how we can serve the people. Earlier today, I had the opportunity to go with some of my colleagues, a bipartisan group of us new members, to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And we lay a wreath there at the tomb as we head into Memorial Day and had an opportunity to reflect on the great sacrifices that have been made in the history of our country. And it gave me personally the opportunity to remember some of the sacrifices that my friends and battle buddies have made. And it reminded me about what our responsibility is to honor them. And it reminded me that there are no labels when you're in a foxhole, that there are no labels when you're walking on a patrol, and that when these great heroes are out serving our country, there is no label identifying their party affiliation, their religious practice, the community that they come from, because they understand it's about one team, one fight, serving one awesome nation. And that's our responsibility here, to serve in that same spirit and recognize we have many problems that need to be solved now, not next month or next year or after the next election cycle, that we have to stand up, honor them, and work together to find our common ground and pursue these common sense solutions. And if we do that, then we will truly honor them and we will embrace the trust that has been emplaced with us. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I thank her for mentioning our veterans. My own father left the mainland in 1945 and went to first place Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu, your home state, before he went into the Pacific Theater. And I can't help but think that he would want this very thing to happen here, that we would actually come here and spend our time honoring the sacrifice that those men and women made and finding solutions for the American people, making the American nation a better place to live and work, study and grow up and excel, become the type of people we can become. So thank you very much for your comments today. And now I'd like to yield 3 minutes of time to a good friend of mine from Illinois, Chicago Bear fan himself, Mr. Lipinski.
I want to thank Mr. Reed-Ribble for yielding, and I want to stand here on the Republican side of the well to just express how important it is that we stand here together. As Mr. Ribble just mentioned, talking about our veterans, I was at an early Memorial Day commemoration yesterday, and people there aren't talking about Democrats and Republicans. We're talking about those men and women who have given their lives for our country, standing together, fighting together to maintain our freedom. Today, we see too much division here in Washington. Now, my background is in engineering. Engineers are problem solvers. So I came to Congress 8+ years ago, determined to solve problems. But as our nation's problems have gotten bigger, Congress has gotten smaller. Not smaller in size and certainly not smaller in ego, but smaller in the capacity to get things done. My constituents certainly see this. What they want to see is Washington working together to help with job creation, to work on reducing our debt, and to work on solving the many other problems that we face. Instead, they see fighting in Washington. Now, where I come from on the southwest side of Chicago in the Bungalow Belt, we know that when we are sent to do a job, there's a bottom line: get the job done. You know, businesses, families, organizations know if they're going to survive, they must solve problems. It's time for Washington to get this, because we must come together to face these big issues. And that's what problem solvers and no labels are all about. To come together, not to lose the fact that we're Democrats and Republicans, liberals or conservatives, but to work to solve problems, because we must do this. If we do not, we will be failing the American people, failing our constituents, those who have sent us here. If we do come together, we can work to solve some of these problems and make sure that America's brightest, America's best days are still ahead of us. The American people are counting on us. So I'm glad to stand here tonight with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And I thank Mr. Ribble for leading this here tonight, and say we are united to solve problems. We are no labels. We're not going to solve the problems overnight, but this is where we need to start, and to let the American people know that there are members of Congress, there are people in Washington who want to work together and solve these problems. And I pledge my support to my colleagues here, and we are going to work together, and America's brightest days are yet to come. I yield back to Mr. Ribble.
I thank the gentleman for yielding in his comments, and I just have to say, if a Green Bay Packer fan like myself, Mr. Speaker, and a Chicago Bear fan like Representative Lipinski can get together and talk about things, if we can talk about that, we can talk about anything. I thank the gentleman for his comments. It was 2009. In fact, it was around Christmas time, 2009, where I became convicted about possibly running for Congress for the first time. I'm in my second term, Mr. Speaker. And I came here to this chamber, not just represent the citizens of Northeast Wisconsin, but I came here because I believe that the fabric of trust between the American people and its government has been torn. But fabric torn can be mended. It can be mended by common thread that binds us together, not as Republicans and Democrats, men and women, but common thread that binds us together as Americans. But common thread can only be used if it's found. Common thread can only be found if you seek it. One of the reasons that I feel we sometimes can't repair this torn fabric is because it's so difficult to find the common ground. But common ground indeed can be found when representatives are willing to seek it out. You know, Mr. Speaker, our founders established a representative republic and instructed us, and they said if we could find agreement, do those things. But if we couldn't find agreement, they warned us as well. They said that where you can't find agreement, it might be best for you not to do those things until you can, in fact, find agreement. And so we have to go out and we have to look for it. And I could talk to my Republican colleagues every single day. In many respects, it's like preaching to the choir. And I think that preaching to the choir is a fine thing. I mean, you often preach to the choir because you want them to sing. But the fact of the matter is, I have agreement with my Republican colleagues on most things. Not everything, but on most things. So therefore, I must go and I must talk to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. The fastest way to mend that torn fabric is by meeting people, by building trust, by taking the time to understand them, and then seeking for the areas of common ground, to find the common thread that binds us together, and when we find that, we can begin to repair the torn fabric between the American people and its government. It's really what we've been sent here to do. We've been sent here to find and solve problems, not to fight about them. Now, disagreement will happen. In fact, you can look historically into this chamber, and there's been a lot of disagreement. It dates back to the beginning of our nation's founding. But there's also been a lot of agreement. Think about the differences from 1787 to today. Think about the America that exists today. And in much of it, it exists because the men and women who were sent by the citizens of their districts to lead came here and through statesmanlike qualities were willing to lead. They had the courage to make tough decisions and then lead this country to the place that it is today. I am filled with hope about America. I'm filled with hope because of the colleagues that I work with here. I'm filled with hope, Mr. Speaker, because of men like you. I thank you for your time tonight. I thank my colleagues for their time. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The parliamentarian told me I wasn't supposed to thank you. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent that all members be given 5 days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honor and a privilege to once again have this opportunity to anchor the CBC special order along with my very distinguished colleague, my good friend from the Silver State, Representative Stephen Horsford, where for the next 60 minutes during this hour of power, members of the Congressional Black Caucus will have an opportunity to speak directly to the American people about the issues facing higher education here in America. We are at a crisis moment as it relates to our capacity to make sure that we can provide an affordable college education to as many Americans as possible. The problem that we in this country confront is twofold. First, the cost of a college education keeps going up, but the amount of financial aid available to younger Americans keeps coming down. And as a result, higher education is increasingly out of reach, particularly for low-income Americans or working families or the sons and daughters of the middle class. And a college education is a pathway to the American dream. And so the fact that it's increasingly out of reach is incredibly problematic for this great country. Compounding that fact, secondarily, is the reality that the amount of student loan debt for younger Americans has increased exponentially. And if the Congress does not act in advance of July 1st, then the interest rate for federally subsidized student loans will double in its amount. It will increase from its current rate of 3.4% to 6.8%. This increase will impact more than 7 million younger Americans. It's a crisis that we must confront. The CBC today will lay out a vision for how we can deal with the immediate crisis that we confront that's approaching as we march toward July 1st, as well as ideas for tackling the broader issue of college affordability. Many of our members will also lay out the problems with the GOP approach as represented in H.R. 1911, which will only make the problem worse, not better. We're pleased that so many of my distinguished colleagues have joined us today to participate in this special order, and to get us started is our eloquent, dynamic leader, the chairperson of the Congressional Black Caucus, Representative Marcia Fudge.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to thank my colleagues, Congressman Jeffries and Horsford, for once again leading the Congressional Black Caucus Special Order Hour. I cannot think of a more timely topic for today's special order. Once again, our youth are facing a student loan crisis. Mr. Speaker, George Washington Carver once said, "Education is the key to unlock the golden door of freedom." Nowhere is this truer than in this country, where we know for a fact that access to a quality education is the ladder to a better and richer tomorrow. Providing access to education is in America's very DNA, and it goes back to when two of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, established state universities. This tradition continued in 1862 when President Lincoln signed the Morrill Land Grant Acts to create land-grant colleges, an effort to promote higher education for working-class citizens. Nearly 100 years later, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Higher Education Act of 1965, and thus the Pell Grant was created. Today, an affordable college education is more important than ever in this country's history. In the next decade, 63% of all jobs will require at least some post-secondary education. And in order to compete for jobs of the future, our children must be equipped and not saddled with debt. Congress has a duty to ensure that federal education assistance is both affordable and accessible. On July 1st, if Congress does not act, rates for college students taking out subsidized Department of Education loans are scheduled to double from 3.4% to 6.8%. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this week, the House will place the place affectionately referred to as the People's House, believe it or not, will consider a bill that would do more harm than good. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle will bring the so-called Smarter Solutions for Students Act to the House floor. This bill is not a smart solution. In fact, it is not a solution at all. It actually makes it more expensive for students and parents than if Congress did nothing and let the interest rates just double. To be clear, I want to assure all Americans that all Americans know exactly what Republicans are proposing. The Congressional Budget Office found that this bill will cost students and parents $3.7 billion in additional student loan interest, and those charges will be over a 10-year period. So why propose such a bill? Why would members of Congress in the People's House claim that this is a good bill? Believe it or not, this legislation is an attempt to move closer to a balanced budget on the backs of college students. The true purpose of this legislation is to squeeze out revenue to pay down the federal debt. Yes, we will vote on this bill this week. that seeks to decrease the federal deficit on the backs of a generation already being called Generation Jobless. Yet still no jobs bill. This legislation totally ignores the fact that student loan delinquency and default rates are already exceedingly high. Due to the recession and unemployment, nearly 20% of student loan borrowers were 90 days or more behind in payments at the end of 2012, so why increase it more? In addition to the student loan crisis, I just have to mention the Department of Education's PLUS loan crisis, another crisis that is breathing down the backs of college students. Over the last few years, thousands of students have been sent home from college because their PLUS loans were denied after the school year commenced. HBCUs have lost millions in revenue. The CBC recently met with Secretary Duncan and requested that the department reverse course to stop the bleeding. As a result, the department is sending out notifications in an effort to get students back into school, and hearings will be held around the country this month and next month. College presidents, students, and parents must speak up and demand a change. The CBC will continue to push back and speak out as the future of student loan programs is debated. We will not stand by and watch Congress or the Department of Education hurt our students' chances of a better tomorrow. Not on our watch. I yield back.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Fudge, for so eloquently laying out both the history in this great country of investing in higher education, whether that's in the private school context or in the public school context, but making sure consistently that our young people are prepared for the challenges of the modern day economy, which will increasingly require a college degree, if not a graduate degree, and significant